Hey, we're live, I think. Hello. What day is this today? Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday to everybody. Nice to see you here. Thank you for joining me. Something always happens without failure. I ran downstairs to get a cup of coffee. Just getting prepared, I managed to spill it all over myself. I haven't had time to change my So I'm doing this live stream coffee stained and slightly damp. That's probably too much information, isn't it? But why not share these things, That's what's going on in my life. What's going on in yours? So welcome to this lesson stream live. Please say hello. Elena, hello. It's your first live ever. Wow, this is so exciting. I think this is our fifth live. And the idea is to start doing one every week. But at the moment, we're doing maybe one every other week. And it's all about story and storytelling in the classroom. And we'll be sharing the recordings as well of the previous ones. And if you're not watching this live and you would like to take part in the next one, you can subscribe at lessonstream.com and I'll let you know when the next one is. So yes, and today this is actually a repeat, but let me explain. You see, last week we did the same live. It was called History Anyone, as you can see from the title. And I spent, a good amount of time planning it and preparing it. But I thought afterwards, I was going, you know what? It could have been so much better. It was a little bit, maybe, as we could say, half-baked. And so rather than just start something new, why not just go back to it and do take two? So here we are, take two. And what makes this live even more special than the previous one is that we have a special guest. We have a great history teacher and a new friend and colleague of mine called Anthony. And Anthony Hocking will be joining us in about maybe 15, 20 minutes. And that's the plan. It's nice to see you all there. Hello, Phil. Phil prefers sequels anyway. Hello, is that F. Thalia there? And hello, Justinia and Deborah. Great to see you. And Bart, it's been some time, Bart. And Ellie, great to see you. Where's Anthony? Well, I'll introduce Anthony in a little while because he's a man that does need an introduction. And Natalie, hello. And Debbie, so nice to see so many friends. So thank you for being here. Now, just a question for you before we get started, a question about history. Because I'm going to guess that the fact that you're here today means that you do have an interest in history, some little passion. Am I right in thinking that? And I would like you to tell me what area, what stories from history, what eras do you enjoy? My personal favorites, well, they come and go, don't they, depending on what you're doing. But I've always had a passion for the Normans. I've always had a little fascination for the Normans. I've also recently started to enjoy Mehmet II from the Ottoman Empire and his conquest of Constantinople. Constantinople, because that comes courtesy of a Netflix dramatization, which it's a great. The acting is really bad, but the narration and the historians, fantastic story, so well told, and also courtesy of Netflix. I maybe indirectly, I've started to develop a passion and an interest in Japanese history. So what we've got Jim and Julie. Hello, Jim and Julie Morton. Civil rights era. We've got Middle Ages from Olga. That's Olga, isn't it? Have I got my Cyrillic right there? Medieval times. I wonder which does that general medieval times, Esteban? Which country or which cultures are you interested in there? The Tudors. Gillian likes also the Tudors. Fantastic. Constantinople, like me. And Roman times, says, watch your Flavia. So do you, as language teachers, do you use history in the classroom? Is it because I was just having a chat with Anthony, who will be bringing on screen in a little while, and Anthony is a great advocate of different teachers from different subjects, working together and pooling their ideas and learning from each other. And so perhaps some of you actually are English and history teachers. Is there anyone here who would claim to be such a thing? Or perhaps you're an English teacher, you're not a history teacher, but you just enjoy maybe bringing history into the classroom every now and again, or maybe you've done so through your course book. What I'm going to do is Esteban loves to use history in your class. This is great. And you're an English teacher, Esteban, I assume. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an activity here. This is an activity I've been working on for months, not just days, not just weeks, but literally months. This can sometimes happen. When I work on an activity, it can sometimes take over my life. And the lesson plan that's developing, I'm developing it, and I usually work in 3 or 4 at the same time. So I work on it and I come back to it. Okay. So this is an activity I'm going to share. And we're going to walk through this. And I'm just going to give you an example of how I think English teachers can maybe exploit history in the classroom. Now, one thing, or maybe 2 things to bear in mind here, is when we're maybe taking this kind of approach to a subject approach for English language teachers, I think maybe we've got to change our chip a little bit. Grammar is not going to come to the front of things. Really what we're trying to do is immerse our students in language, engage them, make them curious for the language, meaningful in language, using the language, listening to the language. That, in my mind, comes first. Grammar can come out of that. Lexis can come out of that. But we can start off, of course, with us, equip students with some of the language that they're going to meet in this activity. And my suggestion here would just be to invite students to look at these words and maybe make some pairs, make some collocation pairs. And there may be more than one possibility. Let me just see. We could have, for example, an unprovoked attack. That would be an example of a pair. I wonder if you can identify any other pairs. Mine is an unprovoked attack. I'm just reading through some of your other comments here. We've got Christine, is also a history and English teacher. Greetings from Vienna. Hello, Christine. Watch Your Flavia is just a plain old English teacher who wants to incorporate some extra value in the class. Gillian, hello, Gillian. So you'd like to, great. And Jim and Julie Morton, 2 for the price of 1. I don't know if you've got Jim or Julie, but you've learned about things like World War II Japanese internment camps in the USA and the Underground Railroad using children's picture books. Great. So we've got Ephalia, military presence. We've got industrialized economy, military ambitions. So yeah, some of these words can be used more than once. Natural resources, rising ambitions, international presence. So there's a lot of possibilities here. And there's more than one way to match up these words. An economy system. So let me just give you a situation. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a situation. This is a fictitious situation, okay? You are a nation, a fictitious nation, all right? You're a fictitious nation. You are in the shoes of this fictitious nation, all right? And you have ambitions, some big ambitions. Now, recently, your population has been rising. Your economy has become more industrialized, and you have built up a strong military. And now what you need more than anything is natural resources. This is what you need right now, because your nation is quite poor in natural resources. Now, give me an example. What do I mean by natural resources? I know you know. I don't need to ask that question, but I'm just asking that question as a way to demonstrate the kind of question you can ask your students. So you are a fictitious nation with big ambitions. Your population has been rising. Your economy has become more industrialized. You've built up a strong military. And now what you need more than anything is natural resources. So Natalie says wood, water, minerals, gas, says Gillian. Now, specifically in this story, really what you need is coal, and also possibly iron. And so there's two, in a situation like this, there's a number of different routes we could take, but it comes down to two main ones. You see, what are your two main options here? Your two main options. You need natural resources in order to continue to develop. What do you do? What do you do? And you see, recently, you have had your eye on a certain territory. All right? It looks like this. A certain territory. It's a neighboring territory to yours. And you are somewhere to the east of this territory, of this fictitious territory, let's say. Now, Natalie has been very specific. Natalie has said invade, not just invade, but invade Canada specifically. And I apologize that my Cyrillic, declare war and conquer. So we've got some hawks here. War. Now, war could be a byproduct of this thing. It's incredible that you've all gone straight for war and invasion. I was actually thinking of trade. What's wrong with trade? Trading with your neighbors peacefully, you give and take, exchange. You need natural resources. Maybe you've got, I don't know, a fishing industry. Maybe you can trade fish for coal and iron. But nope, you all want to go straight for invasions, don't you? A few people have said war here. War may be a byproduct, a symptom of your invasion. But would you agree with me? What you don't really want is a war. You want a quick invasion. You want your victim just to kind of lie down and take it with minimal resistance and say, yes, have what you want. If there's going to be a war, you don't want it to last long. That's what invasion is all about. And Olga says a union. Now, Debbie says solar wind power. Unfortunately, in this fictitious story, I don't think solar wind power is a possibility. I think it was completely reliant on more, the more standard fossil fuels, in this case of coal. And Jim and Julie, we've got invasion in the brain right now for the current events I assume you're talking about. Absolutely. And Phil is starting to wonder just how fictitious this territory is. Natalie said an interesting thing, a government, a puppet government. And because there are, when I did this the first time round, I mentioned this is the second time we've done this, a man, a participant by the name of Siv, he suggested something quite interesting. I've actually screen captured. He said, help build industry in an underdeveloped country and then control their natural resources in the name of payment, which is quite interesting, isn't it? It's a sort of strategy that falls in between trade and invasion. Maybe it's kind of, this happens. I hear that China gets up to all sorts of no good in various countries in Africa and kind of softly turns into kind of a much more hard approach. So they're kind of, before they know it, China has invested in these countries, so China owns these countries. And I would be wrong to suggest it's only China doing this. This is something that's been happening since the beginning of the kind of imperial empires, isn't it? And trade. So this is the situation. For the purposes of this story, we are going to, we're actually going to invade, all right? We're going to invade. Let me just take you back here. So we're going to invade. Now, this is your territory that I mentioned. Now, what I didn't mention is that there's some, you've got a big advantage here. This is the territory that you've got your eye on. There's some good natural resources here. And one of the big advantages is, do you see this dotted line? I guess you can guess what that is. It's a railway system in this territory. And you have some influence here because you actually control a part of this railway system. Are you with me? And because you control it, you already have some influence inside this territory. And this, over the last few years, has allowed you to increase your economic and military presence. So, and you're pretty confident that you can take over this territory pretty easily. And what I'd like you just to consider, what are the reasons for an invasion, maybe over trade, and what are the reasons against invasion? Maybe you can think about that, but we're not going to spend too much time on it. But that would be a task or a discussion for your students. What are the reasons for an invasion? What are the reasons against invasion? I made a little list here. I'll just go through it. Reasons for. Number one, this is really, really important. Because of your control of the railway, you can actually invade from the inside. You can build up your military presence and strength and invade almost through a surprise attack. Now that's a reason for. Number two, we've mentioned it's got some pretty good natural resources. And number two, if you invade this country or this territory, you would display your strength to the rest of the world. There's a fourth reason, but I'm going to mention this later. I'm just reading your ideas. Gillian said negotiate. I'm glad we've got some doves within us. Debbie says, regarding how beautiful we were, earlier mention of exploitation. What's Imolo Mbui? That I'm not sure that is, Debbie. But reasons against, quite simply, well, of course, is it ethical? You know, there's a big ethical consideration here. And I think morally it would be wrong to do so, you know. An unprovoked attack not only would be unethical, but it would be illegal. The international community would come down on you and possibly force sanctions, or even worse, may launch their own intervention, a military intervention, if you were to invade this country. So these are reasons for, and these are reasons against. Natalie, there's going to be a huge human cost. There could be, exactly. So, okay, we've considered the reasons for, and we've considered the reasons against. However, what we're going to do here is we're going to invade. Okay, we've decided that we're going to invade. And the problem is that we need something. If we're going to invade this territory, there's something that we need. What do we need? And don't say an army, because you've already got one. You've already got a formidable army, and it's already there. You know, mentioned we've built things up from inside. There's something else we need. It's not something physical. It's not something tangible. And the thing that we need is, Natalie says, exactly a reason or an excuse. Now, a strategy would be another great example, says Gillian. A strategy. And Hannah's used a great word here. Hannah's used a word which is used in history a lot, is a pretext. You know, a pretext, that a reason that you pretend to have in order to hide your real intention for doing something. So we need a pretext here. And this could be a question for your students. Just to go over it again, you have influence inside this territory. You can build up your forces inside the territory. If you do it well, you'll probably be able to do it under, under stealth. And so what could your pretext be? What would be a good excuse for invading this territory? Any ideas? What could you do? What excuse could you, obviously we're not looking specific here. We're looking maybe for some general ideas. What would be a pretext? Now, let me just show you something here. Phil was quite clever. Phil is a clever man. Phil suggested that this might not be a fictitious country. Phil suggested this might not be a fictitious scenario, and Phil is absolutely right. Let me just show you something here. Does anyone think they can identify this territory that you can see in front of you? Anybody looking at Phil? This territory, and by the way, there's okay, Mrs. W said pretend that somebody asked for help as an example of a pretext. That's interesting. Phil, you know it's a real place. Germany, says Esteban. I'm going to show you where this is. This is northeast China, also known as Manchuria. You see? And if I show you this, what's that? Can anyone identify this spaghetti that you see in front of you? I know you can. This is the Trans-Siberian Railway. I wonder if anyone has ever ridden the Trans-Siberia Railway, which is very, very long, isn't it? One of the longest things on the planet. It's certainly in the Guinness Book of Records. The longest what? I don't know. The longest man-made structure. It's so long, it's even longer than, I don't know, the Eiffel Tower, if it was on its side. What a stupid thing to say. And if you look at this little circle here, if we look at that in more detail, here we have, you'll see that they've got this. This is called the Chinese Eastern Railway. And it was very important is a lot of historical importance, but I'm not going to go into why. All I'm going to say is this is the piece of railway, that southern branch is the piece of railway that you had control of in the first 2 decades from 1905 until about 1931. Which country are you, by the way? Does anyone know? Yes, absolutely. You know. I can see you know. I know you know. You are Japan. So there's Japan there. And what I've done actually, just to show you the geographical relationship, I've put Manchuria onto Japan. And what's interesting, I said there was a fourth reason why Japan might invade Manchuria, as it did, under a false pretext in 1931. We haven't discussed yet what that false pretext was, but I mentioned there's another reason for having done so. And I wonder if anybody has read this book or seen this book. I came across this book many times in airports in the days before COVID, called Prisoners of Geography by Tim Hall. And there's a great piece of analysis here. He writes that Japan considered Korea to be, in the words of a Prussian military advisor, a dagger pointed at the heart of Japan. Now, at this time, 1931, Japan already controlled Korea, so it was no problem. However, controlling Manchuria made sure that the hand of the dagger made sure that you controlled the hand of the dagger. So the hand of the dagger was China. Let's just go back here. Look at this. So what it's saying here, if you look at the Korean Peninsula, the Korea Peninsula was in effect a dagger pointing at Japan, causing a big threat. So Japan was successful in controlling Korea, but then it wanted to control the hand of the dagger, which was Manchuria. So an invasion wasn't just a reason for obtaining natural resources, but it was a defense strategy, which is also often a reason for doing so. Invasion is a primary form of defense. I think this is very, very relevant right now, if we want to understand, what's going on in the mind of Putin. Liliana, you've read this book, have you? I'm really enjoying it. It's a very. The reason I bought it is I picked it up at an airport once, looked through it a few years ago, and I was quite surprised at how much the introduction spoke about the Russia and Ukraine. And I wasn't really sure why. I was thinking everything that's happening in the world, why is that so important? I was thinking about it the other day, and so I decided to buy it on my Kindle and have been working through it. So we still haven't looked at the why, the pretext, what China did, what Japan did, what this pretext was. And interestingly, I found this very interesting. In the past few weeks and months, there's a term that I had never heard of before, and the term was this. Sorry, I've given you the wrong slide there. A false flag. Has anyone seen this before? A false flag operation. And I've seen this appearing in the news more and more and more. And I had never heard of it until recently, a false flag. And in fact, if you look at, just to give you a little idea here of this is The Guardian, a search I ran, that this idea of a false flag is the idea of it's basically a lie. It's something that you do that gives you an excuse to attack. And another book I just ordered today in preparation for I'm really glad it only came about 2 hours ago. Look, any fans of Tintin? Well, this is interesting because let me just tell you what happens here in this book. You might be a little bit confused. Bear with me, all right? Tintin is in China, and Tintin's a detective. He's a sleuth, and he's kind of been given this tip off that there's a Japanese secret agent up to no good, and so Tintin decides to follow him one night, and he follows this secret agent along with this other guy. I think there's maybe a few of them. He follows them to a railway track, and he thinks, what's going on here? And he watches from behind a tree, and there's an explosion. Can you see that explosion here? And what's happened is these Japanese secret agents or military personnel, they've blown up a piece of their own railway, just as you can see it there. And then what they do after that, they report this back to Tokyo as being an incident, a sabotage carried out by Chinese insurgents. And in doing so, Japan now has a reason, a pretext to attack. Now, this is called the Manchurian incident, or sometimes called the Mukden incident. And what's quite interesting was that, in fact, unlike what you just saw there, that the explosion, according to Wikipedia, was so weak that it actually failed to destroy the track, and a train passed over it minutes later. So it wasn't a very good blowing up job, was it? But that is the event. And just before we bring our very special guest onto the screen, show you, to kind of add some analysis into this and contextualize this for you. I want to tell you why I've chosen the Manchurian incident as a lesson plan, which is in development, and also for this session right now. This goes back to the 1980s when I was a young lad, so much younger than today. And I don't know about what your experience of history was like, but for me, it wasn't a particularly engaging one at school. And I have this memory of being in history class. My teacher was called Mr. H, not his real name, but he was a nice man, but he just didn't have any passion for the subject. He didn't seem to have any passion for teaching either. And he'd been doing history. He'd been explaining to us. He'd been probably dictation or something. And he explained about this incident in which these Japanese soldiers blew up a railway track. And I was thinking, I remember being so bored and thinking, what on earth has this got to do with anything? These Japanese soldiers blowing up a railway track. Why? What's it got to do with me? It happened, 80 years ago. Who cares? I just don't get it. And I remember being so bored, or rather, I should say, I was so bored that it was actually memorable, which usually boring things you don't remember. But in this case, I was so bored that I remembered it. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to bring our new friend, our special guest, onto the screen, and we're going to ask Anthony to tell us why is it so important that we should be studying the Manchurian incident. Just let me tell you about Anthony before we do. 5 reasons why I like Anthony. Number 1, Anthony is a very, very passionate history teacher. I mean, he is incredibly passionate. He is exactly as passionate as history teachers should be. And I know that his students love him for it. Number 2, Anthony is also an English teacher. And so this makes him one of us. And he's worked in CLIL and CLIL programs. He's currently involved in International House on the tip of Italy, just where you can see Sicily. Number 3, he's very experienced, so he knows what he's talking about. Number 4 is important. He's a lesson stream member. If you don't know what the lesson stream membership is, I'll tell you about it later. And number 5, Anthony is so passionate about history that he's got a story to tell us about how he met his wife, which involves history. Anthony, how are you?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
No worries.
What was this about you meeting your wife over history? Tell us.
Well, I met my wife, Natalie, in South Korea. And I think it was our second time I met her. We were in a bar called Rock and Roll in Busan in South Korea. And I started demonstrating to her like battles on the table with popcorn and coins and peanuts. And I think after about 2 hours, she probably was like, kind of like need to go. But I obviously didn't do that bad a job. But I was like, explaining some quite, weird battles like from the medieval. And I was like, Edward I did this. Simon de Montfort, and then he got his head cut off. And, So, yeah. I mean, luckily my wife does have a classics degree. So she's got some love of history, but she's more kind of like ancient Greek, ancient Rome. So
I love it. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
The perfect illustration of how passionate this man is for his topic. And it was specifically popcorn, was it?
Yeah, because you got 3 bowls of popcorn on the table. So I was like, I need something. Okay, popcorn will do. And I'm like, this popcorn's Edward the First. Let's put him there.
Apologies, I'd lost sight of my notes when I introduced you there, Anthony. You're International House in Reggio di Calabria in southern Italy.
Yeah.
And you teach International GCE History, don't you?
Yeah, the Cambridge IGSCE program for history, yes.
And you've been involved in that's a program that doesn't teach only history, but maths, biology, and geography as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's an immersion program, and they all the students will sit an IGSCE in those subjects.
Yes, I know this now because I've got the notes in front of me. You see,
Okay.
I didn't before. So, Anthony, am I right in thinking that, this is back in the 80s for me, the Manchurian incident, this Japanese blowing up this railway in Manchuria, using it as a pretext, a so-called false flag event, was an invasion, as a reason for an invasion. It's something that you still teach now in the international GCE program. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I had to study the Manchurian incident when I did my GCSE history, and also when I was. It comes up when you do A levels, and also that's if you choose to study that particular period at degree level, you'll come across it again. So we teach it because it falls under the kind of broader theme of whether appeasement could be justified. That's appeasement of Hitler, but also Mussolini and the Japanese, because the reason you look at the Manchurian incident is because it's one of the first key events where the League of Nations is demonstrated to be ineffective, because Japan was on the council. It was one of the leading members of the League of Nations, and they basically ignored what the League of Nations asked them to do and carried on regardless of what anyone else said. So this encouraged Mussolini and Hitler to act more aggressively in Europe, and Mussolini in Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia. So it's important because it's the first nail in the coffin of the League of Nations.
Yes. And so would you teach then the Manchurian incident and this whole story, would you teach it alongside other similar stories involving appeasement, so that students can maybe appreciate the patterns?
Yeah, so you look at the remilitarization of the Rhineland, you look at the Italian invasion of Abyssinia, you look at Hitler's actions throughout the 1930s of constantly breaking agreements and then pushing the boundaries that little bit more again and again till you get up to 1938 with the annexation of the Czech Republic, which happened in March 1939, the Munich Conference of 1938, and then eventually World War II. But the key question that you come back to time and time again is, should Britain and France have done something in 1935, 36? Why did they think that they could negotiate with Hitler and Mussolini and the Japanese? And how do all these things interconnect? So you're building up critical thinking, trying to match things on a chronological line, but also look at the themes as well. And you can factor in other things to that as well. So one of the key things would be the Great Depression and the Wall Street crash, because that facilitates the rise of the dictators. And it's also one of the reasons why Japan invades Manchuria, because they are in an economic slump and they need the raw materials and the increase in population and the manpower to reinvigorate their economy.
Mm-hmm. You see, that is really interesting, because I don't remember that. I think for my experience of this back at school was there was lacking a why. Two things that was lacking. Number one is a why, and number two, the sort of connection to me, maybe call it a personalization aspect of it. Why should I care? And it seems to me that by you make it relevant. You can tell students why it's important, and by showing them this pattern, giving them an ability to use this knowledge, not just retain it, but to use it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically can they apply the knowledge? One of the reasons why you teach the chronology and the events is because the students have to then apply that knowledge to analysis of sources, and they have to make links between things in order to evaluate which side was to blame or how far they agree with a certain statement. So you can't really do that without the factual knowledge. However, the difference between your experience learning history at school, mine too, in the early I was in the early 90s when I was in year 9. It's when you teach that traditional chalk and talk, teacher stands at the front of the class. Okay, I'm going to tell you everything that happened in Manchuria. it turns off a lot of students, because you're right, it's very hard to personalize it. How does it affect me? But it's also how does the teacher know that they've actually gained anything from it? Like, you don't give them a reason or an opportunity to demonstrate that they've learned anything and how they can apply it. So the change in history teaching over the years has been, it's just as much skills focused as it is factual. So just as when we teach language, we don't just teach grammar, we're interested in skills as well, whether they're receptive or productive or those kind of things. So it's the same way in a language classroom. We want to push the students towards a freer practice stage at some point in the lesson, get them to use that language autonomously and independent of what we've put on the board. So you want to do the same thing in a history classroom, and there's a lot of overlap between those two approaches in the distinct classrooms, and that's what I find quite interesting about it.
That's really interesting. It makes me think of this kind of the term in English language teaching that we often hear, a differentiation between declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. And declarative knowledge is being able to, recite grammar rules, for example, but the procedural knowledge is instinctively be able to use English or use the language. And and if you apply that, I don't know if these are terms you'd use in history, but it certainly sounds as a parallel. Declarative knowledge was what it was all about when I was at school, learning the dates, learning the people, learning lists of reasons why. I remember a lot, but there was no skills, procedural kind of approaches. And when you say skills in history, that's really interesting. But still, you have to learn the dates. But does that come later?
Yeah. So I mean, one way of teaching the facts is to teach it through source analysis. So, for example, analyzing a cartoon. So there's there's a very famous cartoon, and it's Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler, and they're walking up a path, and the path is surrounded by roses, and they've got their arms around each other like they're best mates, but they've got their arms behind their backs, and they're both holding guns. And the caption of the cartoon is "Someone's taking someone for a walk," and it's by Rowe, David Lowe is the cartoonist. It comes out in 1938, and so basically you would say to the students, using what you already know, let's analyze this cartoon. So what's the significance of all of these different things? So what can you see? The denotation, and then what's the connotation? What effect does that have on the audience? What does it make them think? So, and then they can start saying, "Oh, well, Hitler was a fascist, but Stalin was a communist, and why are they friends?" Okay, so maybe they're going towards the future, but they're going to betray each other at some point in the future. And then you can be like, "Well, okay, how do you think they betrayed each other?" And you're doing like these kind of like throughout the lesson, you're doing these quick stages where you're not just checking understanding, you're trying to get the students to reflect on what they've learned and reflect on where this is going to go, what they're going to get from it. Just as you would do like formative feedback in a language classroom, or asking students to like say, what did you get from today's lesson, kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's really so what a way you're describing it. It's almost, one of my aims mentioned before is to immerse students in language and let the language points, perhaps it's grammar, perhaps it's sets of lexis or whatever, to come out of that. It can be planned, but to start with some kind of message. In my case, it's always starting with a story of some kind and trying to get the language come out of that. It sounds like you're doing something very, very similar, rather than starting with today you're going to learn how to talk about the things you like doing and say how often you like doing them as adverbs of frequency, which is going to be, oh no. Today you're going to learn, it's a similar sort of approach. You're going for a story, aren't you? And you're getting the details and the nuts and bolts to come out of that.
Yeah, going back to the Manchurian lesson, like things that I've done with that particular topic is once they're comfortable with the facts, trying to get them again, going back to this idea of applying the knowledge. So, for example, making a meme to demonstrate how the Japan ignored the League of Nations or how Japan created the pretext. And some of the things my students have come up with are quite, inventive, and some of them have actually been quite dark. And you're like, oh, that's, that's scary. But it's fun because it's using that kind of like social media and up to date things that are important to them in order to try and encourage them to apply what they've learned and creating something. So I think you have to start with some kind of narrative, because if you just start with just pure facts, it turns a lot of students off. And you have to take into consideration that, like, these are not native speakers. We're not teaching history in England. There are some language level issues. There is some need of language support, and you can't just go in and be like blah 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 blah. Okay, it's just they'll turn off and they won't really pay attention. And sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes I'm like, well, that was a bit difficult. So you've got to go back to the drawing board and do it again. But I think doing that, getting to the point where they can demonstrate they've understood something in a creative way, I think is quite useful.
Do you mentioned some of the skills that we're looking at then? You mentioned being able to provide a commentary, let's say, through creating a meme, which is, how would you I don't know how you describe that as a skill for evaluating, forming an opinion about something.
Forming opinion, evaluation, synthesis of knowledge. But there's lots of other things you can do. One mistake I made when I first started teaching history was you have a tendency to say, because your history teachers did it when we were at school, and they were like, who can tell me when this happened? And like, the only people that will put their hand up are like the students that were like me when I was at school. Like, I want to show you what I know. And then the other students will be there just, I don't know, I'm not even going to try. So I came across this approach where you ask the students, put your hand up if you cannot tell me when this happened. And then you get the stronger students to explain it to the students that have put their hand up. And if you have quieter students that have kept their hand down because they don't want to be involved, then you can ask them, say, okay, so you didn't put your hand up. So could you tell me how this happened? And they have to have a go at it, and it's a bit more inclusive. So little things like that, because one of the commenters earlier said that they taught business and science, and there were students didn't have the shared interest that they did. Well, business, we're looking at Manchuria. You can look at the Great Depression, the Wall Street crash. I'm sure if they're not interested in Manchuria, they might be interested in stock markets, the effects of a crash, and then applying that to different periods of history, and like as a starting point to generate some conversation in class.
I think this sounds to me like making connections.
Yeah,
which is,
I really, although I'm not a big fan of Brexit, like as I've said to you before, Jamie, that Brexit has given us a host of materials that we can draw on because it's fresh in a lot of students' minds, and it's contextualized, and it's still going on right now. So, like, for example, when you want to try and teach students to analyze a propaganda poster, you can show them a communist era poster or a Nazi poster, but they've got no real investment in it. But if you show them some of the stuff that was used during Brexit, or maybe some of the things that have been used by people like Trump or Salvini or Le Pen in France, they kind of get that connection, and they can say, well, no, hang on, that's not right. And then you can start saying, well, okay, well, what would be the motive of this? What's the origin? What's the provenance? What's the content? Who's the audience? Who's it for? And that's the kind of stuff you do when you're looking at source analysis. So,
that's one of the, for me, I would call it this delight. Well, it's not actually, under the circumstances, that's probably not a very nice word to use, but this kind of moment we go, it's that Manchurian instant, connecting it with the multiple appearances of this term false flag, which I thought, what is a false flag? Looking it up. Right. That's what it's all about. So for me, it's also the value of taking one single incident like that, or episode, kind of multiple connections. So you're using it for looking at the appeasement. I'm using it for looking at pretexts. So it's almost like you're building up a toolkit to apply
Yes.
to the present. And the history is, it's got to be about the present, understanding the world, isn't it?
Well, I think one of my favorite quotes is by the writer Isaac Asimov. He says that the reason history repeats itself is because no one ever listens, and I think that's true. And we're seeing that now in the Ukraine, and you know, like you said, the false flag incidents with the Russians in the Ukraine, and that there's a historical baggage to that, and this is not a new meme that's come up. This has happened time and time again in that particular area of the world. So it's that using, you go, what you're studying now is going to help you interpret this, and you're going to be able to see the same tropes, and hopefully it's going to make you a better global citizen, because we don't want to just teach the history of our own country. We want to teach the history of other countries, so we have a better understanding of other cultures and how other people would perceive things. And I think that's the other problem with the way history's been traditionally taught. The kind of what's called the drum and trumpet history. It's all kings and queens and battles, which I find interesting, but not everyone does. So what about the history on the lower rungs? You know, from the working class up. How does it? How can we interpret how they would have felt about something? You know, and I think that makes it more accessible to some extent.
Where did you get your passion for the subject, Anthony? Did you get it? Did it start at school?
Yeah, so when I was young. So, for example, I was lucky enough to have grandparents and great uncles and people like that in my family who were either in World War II, or like my great grandfather was he was in the British Army for the whole 4 years on the Western Front. And he was gassed at the Third Battle of Ypres. He was at Passchendaele, and he was at the Somme. He survived the Somme. I don't know how. And then obviously my grandpa was in North Africa with Montgomery and in Italy. And I had other uncles who were at D-Day. And one of my nan's brother lived in the town in Cornwall where I'm from. I'm from Cornwall, called Porthleven, and one of the leader of the Dam Busters raid lived in Porthleven, Guy Gibson. So you'd see him walking his dog every now and again. So kind of like, you know, and then you see, and this kind of ties into another thing that you can look at with history. It's called flashbacks. So you look at an event and then you flash back. Why did that event happen? What's the flashback? And you keep going back. So I was like, well, what made someone take my grandparents away and go, right, go to this country and fight these guys from Germany? How do you get to that point? What's the point back? And then what's the point? Okay, World War One. Okay, well, what's the point back from that? And then you keep going back and finding those connections and putting it on a linear line. And that's where you know, I've always found it interesting. I mean, I love military history, but you can't teach military history all the time. You've got to, you know, it's like one of my favorite books is A People's History of the United States of America by Howard Zinn, and it's a more bottom-up history, and that's something that gets overlooked sometimes. And you know, that's something that you can definitely tap into in like what we do, because we're dealing with people from different cultures, sometimes multicultural classrooms. Draw on people's experiences. The students might have something interesting to say.
So I've learned a lot from speaking to yourself and also from other history teachers. The activity that I sort of, this part of an activity which is coming, was kind of my attempt to put into practice techniques I've learned from yourself and people like yourself, Anthony. So I'd be interested to know just maybe some practical ways to do this. For example, one of the things I tried to do, and I don't know if this is something you do, was to, you caught me out on it. Some people caught me out of it. I told you it's a fictitious place because I kind of didn't want people to be thinking about the facts. And by making the students will become the students, you know, the decision makers here, giving them some sort of agency in the story I'm hoping this is creating an interest, generating an interest in it. I think that's always an important thing for me. So generating an interest, let's say, making students curious for it. Is that's one way of doing it. Throw me some more ideas.
Right. I think, like, for example, you had for your earlier when you were presenting the Manchuria lesson, you had lots of people, saying, "Oh, I would do this or I would do that," in order to kind of provoke a response. So you could do an activity which we do in the language classroom quite a lot, which would be turn it into a speaking task, ranking, categorization, matching the vocab to different categories. Okay, and then using that to spark a discussion. What do you think would be the best way to destabilize a country? Create a pretext for war, set up a puppet government, trade, that kind of thing, and then you can say, okay, so we have two countries. This is Japan. This is Manchuria. Which one of these things do you think Japan did? What were they able to do? Another thing, and then once you've done things like that, you can look at things like, going back again, Jamie, to what you've been talking about with stories, is maybe look at some counterfactuals. So what if Japan hadn't invaded? What if Japan had invaded and had been completely unsuccessful in 1934, 1935? What if they had done things differently? And then you can get the students to create some counterfactuals and to think about things differently, think about what might have happened. So you can do things like that. You can even do, for example, you could do what's called arbitration rather than debate. So you have two groups of students. One is going to say that the Japanese invasion was justified, and the other side is going to argue the opposite. But then you have a third group. So rather than have a debate where sometimes you don't really get the outcome that you want, you have a third group of maybe more able students who will arbitrate the conversation. And their job is to predict what both sides will argue and try and find a middle ground where both sides will be happy. And that puts a different spin on just the usual, I think this, and then you can get a stalemate and it doesn't really go anywhere. So that usually works quite well. And that ties into, again, with things like differentiation in the classroom, giving stronger students a different role in the class. Maybe letting students pick which tasks they want to do according to their learning preference, which is it's a big thing of mainstream education. And I think sometimes it might just get overlooked in the language classroom. So that's what I would do.
Anthony, do you consider yourself to be a storyteller in the classroom?
I'd like, sometimes, yes. I think I'd like to be better at it. I think sometimes you can get a bit away from the kind of the themes when you can get bogged down in detail, and it's quite difficult to to avoid that sometimes with certain topics. But I mean, I do say to my students, okay, I don't want you to tell me what happened. I want you to tell me why it happened, because that's when we learn. And I think maybe a narrative is a better way of presenting some historical events, because it's a bit more accessible. It's more open. And I think when you say to some students, okay, today we're going to learn about Adolf Hitler, and some students will be like, okay. Another student's will be like, oh, not this Hitler guy again. Oh, when's this going to finish? So rather than shutting them down at the start of the lesson, trying to ease them into it, try and build interest, like context build up their interest, see what they think, get their input. So it's a dialogue. Did
you have some resources? I think you mentioned you were going to suggest some resources for us. Am I right?
Yeah. So I think a good. There's lots of things you can do. So I think if you're teaching primary level children, then the TV show Horrible Histories is definitely worth looking at on YouTube. That's great. There is the Times Educational Supplement, TES, which has got loads of free history resources designed by history teachers in mainstream. You might have to adapt some of the language, but some of them have got PowerPoints. If you're willing to pay for resources, there's quite a few websites. There's the two particularly good ones are IChistory.com and Active History. Com. And also, if you are interested in anything, I'm on Lesson Stream. I'm a member. Shoot me a message. I'll be happy to share some things with you.
And you're in the Lesson Stream Facebook group as well, so
Yes, I am. Yeah,
we can get you there. And Anthony he's what's the word I'm looking for? He's a consultant on this. This is a lesson plan that's coming, and the idea of the Manchurian incident is, mentioned that this basically what you see here is the story that can come from the teacher. It's this very short interactive text that's designed to be a discussion, and I'm going to be sharing this. I hope at the weekend with the Lesson Stream membership. And if you're not in the membership, let me just tell you a little bit about it. The Lesson Stream membership, you get access to the lesson plans. There's now 90 downloadable PDF lesson plans waiting for you to download, obviously. That's why they're downloadable. You get this, you access the story course, which is for you to use story to engage your students, make them love your lessons, and for you to develop as a storytelling teacher and develop your skills and confidence. There's also the Fishbowl, which is our online community. This is where discussion happens, where you make friends, connect, share stories. We have some Zoom meetings, which are, you get all, the standard Zoom meetings. Here we are with Scott Thornbury. And he did his very first ever session on story. It was called Scott Talks Story, and you can access all the recordings. So that's the things you get for the price of 1 cup of coffee per week, which I would say is pretty good. But some teachers, I do get a lot of emails from teachers saying they're not sure if this is right for their context. If you're a teacher of young learners, for example, it's not quite for you. This is more for teenagers and for adults. But if you're not sure, just join, see if you like it. If it's not for you, there's a 3-week money back guarantee. Just drop me a line, let me know, and there'll be no questions asked. I might ask you a question, but that's I'll ask you the questions after making the refund. Just go to lessonstream.com and join the membership. Simple as that. If anyone's got any questions before we hang up for Anthony, take advantage. Oops, I've just booted him out there. Sorry, Anthony. If anyone's got any questions for Anthony, now's the time to ask. While I've been speaking with Anthony, I've been aware that some of you've been chatting there. I've not been able to interact, so apologies for that. It's just not being able to do 2 things at once. But if anybody asks any questions that were missed through the session, now would be the time to post them again. Okay, if you asked a question, it wasn't answered, please answer it again. Anthony, just so you know, the reason I kind of make this a long-winded way of doing things is there's a 15-second delay between what I say and people getting it. So if I say ask a question, it's going to take them 15 seconds to hear that. So I'm actually doing this right now. I'm buying time. Let's see. Who wants to have the last word? Anyone want to say anything or ask anything? Maria, missing so much her sessions in the Fishbowl, but you're not teaching anymore, but enjoying it's so nice to see you. This is what happens sometimes. We have these teachers in the Fishbowl and they stop teaching, but they still stay for the stories. Thank you so much, Phil. Great ideas for eliciting and asking the right kinds of questions. Thanks to both of us. That's for me and for you, Anthony.
Thanks.
I saw this discussion of Mr. Hocking expressing that. I'm not sure what that was, Ellie. Thank you, Debbie. Lovely to see you. There's Evie saying thank you, Anthony. Lucy saying fascinating discussion. Thanks to both of us. Wash hands. Is that because of the coffee spill?
Maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. I think maybe you should just wash your hands after speaking with me, Anthony. I think maybe that's what she said. Wonderful, says Sophia. David W. Hello, David. Yes, David, the same link I sent out, you can watch a recording of it afterwards. So just if the link that I sent out to you, just in the approximately 10 minutes, the entire recording will be available for you. Lovely to speak. Thank you so much for your lovely comments. I'll be sending out news of the next lesson stream live. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but I do take a lot of time to prepare them. So please do share them with your teacher friends and colleagues. So there's hello, Carolyn from Hollywood, literally. Thank you so much. I'm fishing for compliments. Of course I am fishing for compliments. I thrive off compliments. Don't we all? Oops, I thought it was. So thank you so much. All right, that's dinner time for me, and it's dinner time for you. Am I right, Anthony?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it pasta?
Oh, not at 9 o'clock at night. No. Probably too many carbs for that. Probably a chicken or something. Vegetables.
Fantastic. Well, I'm having rice
Okay.
and beans and sausage. It's my meat night. I feel bad about telling people I eat meat these days. It's only a matter of time before I turn total vegetarian. I absolutely promise. Yeah. Oh, there's Hannah. Hello, Hannah. Just you. Hannah's got the last word. Hannah says, thanks a lot. All right, Anthony, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. It's been insightful. As I said, I've learned so much from you, and looking forward to keeping it going inside the fishbowl. So thank you to you.
Definitely.
Thank you to everybody. Big heart. And we'll see you at the next one. All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.